Hello and welcome everyone to this edition of Dublin Dance Festival's In Conversation With series for the 2022 festival. I'm Aoife McGrath, and today I'm honoured and so excited to be in conversation with Áine Stapleton and Michelle Boulé. Two wonderful artists, two artists who I have found so inspiring, and who I've had the pleasure and honor to speak to before. So we all know each other, and we're really thrilled to be sharing this conversation with you all today. So the topic of our conversation is dance and health. And both Áine and Michelle have experience working both independently on this topic and also together, which gives us beautiful material to address in our conversation. And I'm really looking forward to getting to know more about both the creative processes and performing processes that both of you are working with, connecting with dance and health. And we'll also get a chance to talk about how you work together. And we'll also then have a chance to talk about Áine's fabulous new work, Somewhere in the Body, which is showing in Dublin Dance Festival from the 18th to the 28th of May at the Project Arts Centre. And it's going to be showing every hour, on the hour, between 12 and 6 p.m. So you may have seen it already, and that maybe you're here after you've seen that fantastic work, or maybe you're watching this in advance of seeing it. I haven't seen it yet myself because we're recording this in advance of the festival, and I'm so excited to see it, Áine. Can't wait. So to start our conversation today, I'm going to ask each of you individually first to give our spectators a sense of your work, people who may not be familiar with your work yet, and give them a little sense of what you do and how you approach the topic of dance and health in your work. So Áine, will we start with yourself?
Yeah. So for people who don't know me, my name's Áine Stapleton and I'm a choreographer and director. I'm based in Ireland, but I also travel a lot because I enjoy it, and I collaborate a lot with international organizations, artistic spaces and so forth. In terms of dance and health, I guess the last 8 years I focused specifically on creating dance and film work about Lucia Joyce, James Joyce's daughter. I'm sure everyone knows about her a little bit. And so Lucia was diagnosed with various mental illnesses in the early 1900s, 1930s, I guess, and then remained in hospital until 1982, until her death. So my last two films, Medicated Milk and Horrible Creature, which Michelle was in, performing, focused on different periods of Lucia's life, including exploring her medical records and things like this, and also the complexities of mental illness and what may have contributed to any mood disorders or mental illness that she might have suffered from. And my latest film has moved away from that a little bit in terms of it's not just from Lucia's perspective, and it doesn't include her words like the last two films, but this one is more about how Lucia appears in James Joyce's book Finnegan's Wake in different guises throughout the book, which has been a really challenging thing for me to work with, because I wasn't so familiar with the book before last year. So it's been an intense period, but really interesting as well, and kind of to see where she kind of existed in that space in her father's mind and how he wrote her into his work, and also the kind of trajectory of her own dance career and hospitalization paralleled with what happens in the book and the different drafts that he created between the 1920s and 30s.
Wow. And I know that there's so much to talk about there, and we'll come to that later. But just, I know that those three works that you mentioned, they're most widely known as films, right? Although I know that there were, I think perhaps for the first work, Medicated Milk, there was also a stage performance in advance of the film work. Is that right?
Kind of. There was meant to be.
Yeah, I had a vague memory of that.
It was vague.
But it's just interesting because your trajectory as a choreographer, did you start with film?
No. So when did I finish college? 2004. And after that, I worked as a performer for a few years, and then I started to make work with Emma Fitzgerald, who you know, Eva and Michelle probably. And we had a company together for about 8 years, I guess. And within the company, we mainly did live performance, and towards the end, we started to include more video work, and that just became really interesting for me because I didn't feel so interested in performing live anymore. Although I enjoyed the practice, I just needed a new challenge, and yeah. So
that seems to be a transition that a lot of choreographers are making. Some of them, I mean, I know your transition was pre-pandemic, but an awful lot of people have been making that transition and that leap due to necessity, right? So yours definitely came from a creative impulse. Yeah.
Yeah, I just found, particularly with the Lucia work as well, I thought it was interesting to show the locations where she spent time, and it was kind of, it felt more meaningful and interesting for me to go to these places and kind of feel the energy there and try and relate to that as well, because so much of her story is hard to tell because of the lack of information, I guess. Around her, and a lot of her letters were destroyed after her death as well by her nephew. Yes. So yeah, I thought it was an important element to include, and from there I've just really tried to get deeper into how to create film, and yeah, it's a good additional step for me, I think, in terms of choreography.
Yeah. We'll move to you, Michelle. So that's the connecting point that I know about between yourself and Áine, is your work together on Horrible Creature. But of course, your own practice is global, as is Áine's actually, because you've also done a lot of work in the US. But Michelle, are you beaming in from the US today?
Yes, I'm beaming in from Montana in the United States.
Wow. And do you want to tell us a little bit about you and your career and your origins and how you came to the point of collaborating with Áine?
Yeah, so gosh, so many tendrils here. I started dancing when I was 5 and continued on until I got injured. And I'll say this first on this theme of dance and health. I think a lot of people actually come into dance because it gives them a free space to do something they can't do in their life outside of dance class, you know, to like have that expression and that voice in a certain kind of way. I just seen that, you know, having taught dancers for a long time now, and some of the tendencies that come up, it's like, okay, I'm safe here to be in my body in a certain way. So I went through the experience of like my first surgery on both of my feet when I was 13, really bad tendonitis when I was 16, thought I was done dancing and had to quit. Literally went to college not knowing what I was going to do, but then realized there was a dance program at my college. And what I got introduced to there was a more holistic way of working with the body, which dance offers. Like if you want to excel in something, I feel like if in anything, a person has to really open up the picture of everything that contributes to making that possible. And I think, you know, all these injuries sort of course corrected me to learning more about, okay, how does the body function? So long story short, I became a dance major, moved to New York City a week after I graduated and started dancing. And then just as that progressed, I had already gotten this really amazing foundation of somatic studies at my university. Of course, I got injured again. And I started to understand how consciousness, or like my mental state, was affecting what was happening in my body. Seeing a practitioner who's like, my back is in pain, and he's like, okay, we need to work on your anger. And I was like, really? What's the connection there? But that started to plant more seeds until eventually I started studying energy medicine, primarily through the body talk system in 2007, started practicing in 2008 while I was still performing and teaching and dancing all over the world. Grew that practice and eventually started coaching with that practice too. And that's what I've been doing mostly in the pandemic, coaching creative professionals and business owners. And I do have a movement practice that is the result of all of this history in dancing called Moving with Innate Wisdom. Dancing and also the energy medicine. Like, we have a wisdom within us that wants to be expressed, and it knows how to organize when we're in the right environment, when the communication systems are working well. And so that has been my primary practice during the pandemic. And then, also going to the gym or dancing in the woods, because now I live in a very natural environment.
You were talking, Áine, about the ability with film to capture landscape, but also that landscape is giving us glimpses into inner landscapes as well, or at least that's what I keep taking away from this film, is that when we're talking about location and about going out and finding these places connected with Lucia's biography, they are so effective. Like, there's so much in those spaces. So it must have been, for both of you, what was it like going to those very kind of potent and history-laden places for the film?
Yeah, maybe I'll let Michelle answer that, because I think it was probably very difficult to perform in a lot of those spaces, as well as being beautiful. So,
yeah.
Well, I mean, I think, Áine, like, just super kudos to you, because you did so much research on this prior, and all I had to do was get on a plane and show up. And then I get taken to these incredible places and then get this history. And I mean, I guess as we're talking about this, I think one of the things that's just so interesting about this process and being in these spaces is, the word compassion is coming up for some reason, in terms of, that these places have history. At the same time, I'm also aware, that the past is just a memory. It doesn't even really exist, but it's almost like this portal to have compassion for this history that happened. And I think what I was aware of working with Áine was just a real compassion and empathy for this story, and curiosity and passion for it, and finding a way to, it moves me as I speak about it, like, to let another level of truth come out. Like, what was this woman's story? How was it shut down? How is this related to things that we experience now, man or woman, or whatever you want to call yourself, just like in the ways that we get lost, or are not given options, and our lives can take these incredible turns. So, to literally go to the mental hospital, which that was kind of amazing, just to be in that space, and the people there were really lovely. It's making me cry a little bit.
Oh.
And then just, I don't know, I really remember, like, being in the monastery and taking that journey up the stairs, and like those were really memorable moments for me, just like in honor of this story and this trajectory and this level of difficulty that we all go through on some level in our own way, and for the film to be able to be a place where I guess, you know, it gives sometimes people this ultimate wish that we all have to be seen fully. You know, I feel like there's something really beautiful that Áine was able to do in sharing that story.
And what about the actual process of making the dance?
Mhm.
So is that something, Michelle said that you had done masses of preparation, and I know from your research process, Áine, you're meticulous, and you know the fact that you're going into archives and searching for the letters and reading through them is just so fantastic and brings such a richness to your work, and such a depth to your work. But when we think about the movement, so what do you want to talk a little bit about your creative process from the movement perspective? And of course, all of those other factors feed in inevitably, but a little bit more about that process, the movement creation process.
So with Horrible Creature, I attempted as much as possible to make some short, when I say short, they were also quite detailed choreographic scores, so language scores. And then they were offered to the performers, and then we worked in studio for a few weeks collaboratively. So discussing back and forth about what language maybe evoked some kind of movement that made sense or not, and then the scores were rewritten a bit. And then for the actual filming process, then each location had its own score. So working with language scores is something that came about from, I guess, Deborah Hayes' work, and then working with Emma, who's a fantastic writer. I'm definitely not a naturally gifted writer, but I really enjoy the experience of pulling all these different elements together from like the archives or just random information that seems to make sense, and putting it all together, and seeing what I'm still trying to uncover what it is, or how I work. It's always a work in progress, but just why particular language evokes movement, I guess, more easily than other language, or
Yeah.
But it's definitely collaborative, I'd say. Like, I like to have something ready when I go into the rehearsal process, just so I know, because there's something I want to tell in a particular way, but as long as I have some language form that offers that kind of, I know it's in there somewhere. The story I want to tell in terms of like tone and maybe emotion, and then it becomes something else when it's formed with the performers.
So it's a really, multidisciplinary approach, isn't it? So you have the language and the language translated, or moving somebody and connecting and moving, and then that also being captured filmically. So Michelle, what's it like? Were you familiar with that process? And what's it like to work with Áine with this process?
I am familiar. I was familiar with it also. I think it's somewhat of a common thing to bring in language as an entry point for movement. And what's interesting in hearing Áine talk about that, I think that score that you saw in my solo wonder that stayed with you was interesting, because my approach in that was I didn't want to give it too much language because I didn't want to lock it down. And so I brought something similar to working with Áine, in that we would have these words or these phrases that would become sort of jumping off points to evoke a quality or a tone. And then my memory is of just, okay, like this was the tone, the quality, the rhythm of what this language started to, or gave us like the doorway into what needed to happen for a particular place. And I just remember Áine, you know, I had never been to any of the spaces, then Áine mapping out, well, I think this will happen here and this will happen here. And I mean, it's kind of a fascinating space, which I enjoy in that nothing really gets like super boxed in. As a person who coaches business owners now and running my own business in a certain way, it doesn't always work in business. But it's like a very right brain creative space, and Áine's super respectful of like what's in the room and what needs to happen. And I feel like, you know, there's a lot of space given, and there's a part of me that's like, can we do it again so I can like do a better job? That's my own like inner critic of like, how can I show, you know, just like the own development. Okay, that's who I was this many years ago. Like, how can I show up better in service of this thing? And I think that's also a beautiful, it's an anchor in any kind of project, you know, or in any person's business. Like, what's the core heart or mission or message of this thing, so that people can find their way into it and support it in the way that they want. I mean, I'm remembering one scene that we did in the church, the small church with the green dress. And I was sitting on a chair, and I think that morning I had read or heard something about some war somewhere in the world, and this woman losing her family and just all of that pain. And that's actually why I started crying in that scene, because I was pulling that story up. And I've done that in the past too, in other works. It's just like, this is all, we're all so connected. And I do think dance and performance in that safe space of the theater can be a vehicle for us to, someone said this to me once, like seeing me perform on stage, he's like, you're exercising all this stuff that we keep stuck inside of ourselves. So in that particular scene, it was pretty, I don't know if you can remember, Áine, but it felt like it was pretty spontaneous. Like, we had these directives, but then this thing just started happening, and we let it happen. And it was connected to not only the work we were doing, but something else that was happening in another part of the world. So I feel like, you know, performance and that sort of art making is a vehicle for just seeing the way that this consciousness is pervasive, and we can bring it home, and we can experience it, and we can hold it and bring resolve to it.
Yeah. That's really, really gorgeous, and a beautiful way to think about what dance can do and how dance is interconnected. In terms of working with film, I was also just struck there by the thought you said that, you know, working with others. So you worked for a long time, Áine, didn't you, in a dancer in your own work? Mm-hmm. So you choreographed, or you co-created, or solo created, and then you also performed it. So what's it like handing ideas over?
Yeah. It was so amazing the first time I got to do that. Like, when I worked with Emma, we did have The Smell of Want, I think it was in 2011, 2012. And we had a large group of performers. But I guess, if I remember correctly, our way of directing them was quite open, in that we were in the work as well, and we gave them the score, but we weren't constantly an outside eye. So when I first worked with Sarah Ryan for the work in progress of Horrible Creature, it was such a great feeling to be outside, and like just so interesting to see, okay, like what works and what doesn't, and why, and trying to understand that, and kind of understanding your own preferences and process. And since then, I definitely feel more interested in staying on the outside of the process, for everyone's sake.
Oh no, we miss you as a dancer for sure.
I think the inner critic said it's time to get off the stage finally, and I couldn't listen anymore. Yeah, and then for the recent the film installation that I'm working on now, I worked with two wonderful. And I'd say very different performers in lots of ways as well. So that was another new experience for me, I guess, with Colin Dunn, who I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes. And
Katie Vickers as well, who I hadn't met before the rehearsal phase. So yeah, it's all just learning and yeah.
So just out of curiosity, how had you not met one of your collaborators before you started rehearsing?
Mm-hmm. So this project was funded towards the end of 2019, and then, like everyone, the pandemic, it was on hold. So actually Michelle was meant to be involved for quite a long time, which couldn't happen. There was just so many restrictions in place.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But I'll hopefully get her for the next one. Let's see. And then very, very luckily came across this beautiful dancer online, Katie Vickers, and contacted her. She's based between the US and Europe, and she came on board at the last minute.
You did very tantalizingly say to us that you were hoping Michelle would be with you for the next project. So I have to ask, do you already have notions for where this is going next? Are there plans afoot?
Yeah, so I've been back and forth to Trieste a little bit in Italy, which is where Lucia was born, and spent, I think, from 1907 when she was born until 1915. So what I need to do after this project premieres is to begin work on some kind of script and dance script about Lucia's early life, very early life. So looking at themes, I guess, of like spirituality, when she first came into the world, and yeah, that time until she was 6-7 years old, and what was happening in the household at that time, and what she might have picked up on or energetically, or until the point when they left Italy.
Oh, well, I think that is a wonderful note to finish our conversation on, if we're happy. And for all of our viewers, I'll just remind everybody it's running from, so Somewhere in the Body is running from the 18th to the 28th of May, on the hour, every hour between 12 and 6. And thank you so much, Áine. Thank you so much, Michelle. I knew it would be a fascinating conversation, and it has been. And thank you to Dublin Dance Festival as well for bringing us all together.
Thanks. Can I just say as well, it's going to run for an additional week. It's a co-production with Project Art Centre and Dance Ireland, and it'll run again at the end of the festival for an additional week.
Oh, brilliant. Fantastic. So another week after the 28th of May, then for the following week.
4th of June, I think.
Till the 4th of June. Brilliant. So everybody, no excuse not to catch this beautiful work. And look forward to chatting to you both again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thanks so much, Michelle, as well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.